These are days and nights of venom and blood. Heroes will rise as the anchors fall.
What is up, YouTube? Dottz Gaming here, and welcome to my Elder Scrolls Online Race Class Combination Guide. One of the most common questions I see asked by new players is what race is the best for the class I want to play, for the playstyle I want to use, and this video will answer all of those questions. A lot of the videos that are out there are a little bit outdated right now, so my goal with this one is to give you guys an updated video with the best race class combinations. And in a lot of video games, race is a cosmetic thing, or it has maybe very small, minute buffs here or there. You know, it might be a little bit different for certain roles. Race choice in ESO, at least in my eyes, as someone who likes to min-max their characters, extremely important. You could notice a 5% plus power difference sometimes between having an optimal race and having a non-optimal race. And while the gap, like that percentage between the different races, has been getting smaller with weaker races being buffed, race choice is still extremely important when choosing your class, but even more importantly, when choosing what role you want to fill. What I'm going to do in this video is break down all of the race's passives. Afterwards, I'll tell you guys which race will fit each class's role the best. And for those of you who are very new, the roles I'm going to be going over are Tank, which is the person who wants to take on the damage and the aggro for your group. Healer, which is the guy who heals your teammates. Magicka DPS, the character that uses magic-based abilities and the Magicka stat to deal their damage. And on the other side of the coin, you have Stamina DPS, which uses stamina abilities and that stat to deal the majority of their DPS. But I guarantee there are some of you out there, especially if you're new, that are unsure exactly what build you want to play, or maybe you want to play 2 or more different playstyles on one character. Well, I will also tell you guys the best jack-of-all-trades races that can shift between different playstyles and still contend with the top guns in each category. So kicking off the racial passives that we're going to go over, we're going to start with the race I'm currently playing, the Breton. So as you can see on this chart on the screen, the first passive you have is Opportunist, which increases the experience gain with the light armor skill line by 15% and increases your alliance points gained by 1%. The light armor skill thing really only matters when you're leveling, but the alliance points is very, very big if you plan on PvPing, and especially if you want to contend for Emperor. Getting that extra 1% alliance points can make the difference between getting it and not getting it. Gift of Magnus increases your Mass Magicka by a certain amount, up to 10%. You have Spell Resistance, which increases your spell resistance by up to 3960 at rank 3. And then Magicka Mastery, which reduces the Magicka cost of your abilities by up to 3% at rank 3. So I'm sure you guys can tell that Breton is going to be an extremely good Magicka-based race. You know, any class or role that's going to really focus on Magicka is what you're going to want to use the Breton for. Now, moving into the next race on the Daggerfall Covenant, we have the Orc. First passive they have is Craftsman, which increases the experience gain with your heavy armor skill by 15% and increases your crafting inspiration gain by 10%. So if you really want to make like this guy your crafting character, Orc is definitely a good one, because if you've played the game for a while, you know that getting your crafting up is extremely important, and any extra bonuses you can get to leveling your crafting is definitely a good thing. Then you have Brawny, which increases your max health and max stamina by 2%, 4%, and 6% as you level it up. Unflinching, which increases your healing received and health recovery. And then Swift Warrior, which increases your damage dealt with melee weapons and reduces your sprint cost and increases sprint speed. Orcs are going to be good for if you want to tank, or if you want to do stamina-based melee DPS, they're also a good choice for that. Moving into Redguard, the first passive they have is Wayfarer, which increases the experience gain with the one-handed and shield skill line, blah blah blah, by 15%, increases the duration of eaten food by 15 minutes. Then you have Exhilaration, which increases your stamina recovery, Conditioning, which increases your max stamina, and then Adrenaline Rush, which allows your melee attacks to restore 1% of your max stamina, with the effect only being able to occur once every 5 seconds. So I'm sure it's pretty obvious that Redguards are going to be extremely good for stamina-based DPS. That's just based off their passives alone. That is going to be what they excel at the most. Moving into the Ultimate Dominion, we have the High Elves. The first passive of the High Elves is Highborn, which increases your experience gain with the Destruction skill line by 15% and increases your overall experience gain by 1%. Obviously, though, the 1% is, it's a 1% experience gain. You're not going to really notice it. But the experience gain with the Destruction Staff skill line will be noticed if that's the type of weapon you want to use. But more importantly, here come the Magicka passives. You have Spell Charge, which increases your Magicka recovery. You have Gift of Magnus, which increases your max Magicka. And Elemental Talent, which increases your Flame, Frost, and Shock damage by up to 4%. If you plan on using any elements of any kind or doing Magicka DPS, High Elf is going to be the way to go. They just give you a lot of different damage increases with all the different passives and will be the best choice. Next up on the Dominion, we have the Wood Elf, with the first passive being Acrobat, which increases your experience gain with the bow skill line by 15% and decreases your fall damage by 10%. Nothing really special with that one, but this is why you're going to pick your Wood Elf for all of these stamina passes, which you're going to notice, in my mind, are much better than the Red Guards. You have Y'ffre's Endurance, I don't know if I said that right, but it increases your stamina recovery by up to a whopping 21%. Then you have Resist Affliction, which increases your max stamina and gives you poison and disease resistance, extremely good for PvP. And then you have Stealthy, which reduces your stealth detection in the radius around you and increases damage done while coming out of stealth by up to 10%. I'm sure you're going to be able to tell Wood Elves are very, very good stamina DPS. Extremely good. Especially for PvP, being that you have the poison and disease resistance. And if you're somebody you're going to be stealthing around in PvP a lot. So when you pop out of stealth, you're going to immediately get a little bit of a damage boost when you pop out. Very good for PvP. Next up, we have the Khajiit, with the first passive being Cut Purse. Increases your experience gain with the medium armor skill line by 15% and increases your chance to successfully pickpocket by 5%. Again, nothing really special there, just a little lore type of passive for the Khajiit. But again, moving into the big boys, the ones that you're really here for. Nimble increases your health recovery and stamina recovery. You have Stealthy, again, similar to the Wood Elves. Reduces the detection radius in stealth and increases your damage done while in stealth. And then Carnage increases your weapon critical. Very, very important. A lot of the best PvE builds, at least as far as I know, as a Magicka Nightblade, the builds that I look up, and then even other builds I've looked up, crit in this game is very, very important. So when you're trying to, and especially because the Khajiits have stamina-based passives and stealth-based passives, you're going to be wanting to use the Khajiit in a stamina DPS build. The extra crit is going to just help you up your DPS overall, and then the health and stamina recovery is going to make it easier for you to sustain that DPS. Again, from a stamina perspective, you're not really going to be using Khajiit in a Magicka build, being that their stats really only boost your health and stamina recovery. So moving on to the Ebonheart Pact, we have the Argonian. The first passive of the Argonian being Amphibian, which increases your experience gain with the Restoration skill line by 15%, increases your swimming speed by 50%. But again, that's just kind of like a lore-based thing. We're moving on to the important stuff. Resourceful increases your match Magicka by 1, 2, 3% as you level it up. And then, a very interesting one. Whenever you drink a potion, you're restored 12% of your max health, Magicka, and stamina. To me, that seems like that could be very helpful for a tank, someone who needs to keep themselves and their resources buffed up a good amount. But I could also see it being used for many Nightblade builds, being that Nightblades have a Catalyst passive, the passive called Catalyst, where whenever you drink a potion, you are restored ultimate. I don't know if other classes have the same type of thing, but I see this comboing very well with that Nightblade passive, and I think you can make some cool builds with it. The next one is Argonian Resistance, which increases your max health by 3% and your poison and disease resistance by up to 1485. Very similar to the Wood Elf passive, very good for PvP. Then you also have Quick to Mend, increases your healing done and received by up to 5%. Very good for a healer. Argonians seem to be able to fit in a lot of different roles, being that you have the potion. Whenever you drink the potion, it restores some health, magic, and stamina. You get disease resistance and some extra max health, and you can also do some more healing. They kind of they don't really excel at anything in particular, but they can kind of fit into multiple different roles if you want them to. But we'll touch on that more when we talk about the classes. Next up, we have Dark Elves, or the Dunmer. First passive being Ashlander, which increases the experience gain with the dual wield skill line by 15% and reduces damage taken by environmental lava by 50%. So in case you find yourself running in lava a lot, well, Dark Elves is going to be your choice then. But the more important passives, we have Dynamic, which increases your max magicka and max stamina by up to 6%. Resist Flame, very good if you plan on playing a vampire. Increases your max magicka by up to 3%, and Flame Resistance by 2,079. And then Destructive Ancestry, which increases your flame damage and then flame, frost, and shock damage by a little tiny bit, but mostly you're concerned about that flame damage. Going to be awesome for Dragon Knights, because Dragon Knights deal mainly fire damage, and this passive will buff that fire damage directly. But being that Dunmers also give an increase to max magicka and max stamina, you can kind of put them maybe in a stamina role, but obviously they're going to be better in a magicka role, being that you have that max magicka on both passives through Dynamic and Resist Flame. And if you especially want to play a vampire, Dunmer are a good option. Breton's a good option too. You get that full spell resistance, but Dunmer give you the direct fire resistance to counteract the negative that you get from being a vampire. Now moving into our final race, we have the Nord. The first passive being Reveler, increases the experience gain with the two-handed skill line by 15% and increases the duration of any consumed drink by 15%. The first important passive is Stalwart, increases max magicka by 2% and health recovery by 6% up to 20. That goes up to 20%. The health recovery with the stamina going up to 6. You have Resist Frost, which increases your max health and then gives you cold resistance, and then Rugged, which gives you a damage reduction. As you can tell, these are going to be your tanks. That's, in my mind, that's really the only role the Nord fits into. I think it's kind of crappy that Nords just will not be nearly as good as the other races when it comes to DPS. But if you know that you want to play a pure tank, Nord's going to be your way to go. Surprise, there's actually one more that I can't believe I forgot about. The Imperials. First passive of the Imperials is Diplomat. Increases your experience gain with one-handed and shield by 15% and increases your gold gain by 1%. Then you have Tough, which increases your max health by up to 12%, Conditioning, which increases your max stamina by up to 10%, and Red Diamond, which gives your melee attacks a 10% chance to restore 6% of your max health. I don't think they're going to be quite as good of tanks as the Nord, but they're still going to be good tanks, giving you that leech type of attack, possibly with your melee attacks. With the buff to both stamina and health, it makes Imperials a very good jack-of-all-trades type of race. They're not going to be as good as other races when it comes to magicka builds, but again, that boost of stamina will still help with other things like root breaks and CC breaks and stuff like that, and max health is always welcome. So Imperials are a race that they don't super excel at anything, but they're pretty good at everything. They're like the stamina counterpart to the Dunmer. But even then, the Dunmer get a little bit of stamina bonus, but you know, the Dunmer also have that little bit of magicka portion. We will get into this more though in the next section, where I'm going to break down the best race by role for each class. So let's move on to that part right now. So now we're going to cover each class with the different roles and which race is best for each role. So starting off with my current class, the Nightblade, and we're going to start with magicka DPS. For PvE, High Elf is going to be the best. You just get the most stat bonuses from your magicka, like to your magicka, and you also get those elemental increases. It's just the other races don't touch High Elf. High Elf just gets all offensive bonuses from its passives. But if you also want to PvP, notice how I said that's best for PvE. If you want to PvP, High Elf is still good. But if you're like me and you don't want to get completely, insta-gibbed in 2.5 seconds, play the Breton. The Breton will give you that spell resistance, and especially me, I like to play Vampire on my magicka builds, so having that spell resistance is going to make it so that the fire weakness that I have from being a vampire isn't as punishing, but I just still like the more innate tankiness you get from being a Breton. Again, if you want to go full damage, balls to the walls, High Elf's going to be your go-to for PvP. But if you want to have a little bit more survivability without suffering a lot in the damage department, Breton's going to be the way to go. Moving on to stamina DPS, for PvP, your best race will be the Khajiit. With the passives they get and the buffs that they get to their stamina through that and the recovery, it's gonna be the best race for PvE, mostly also because of the critical increase. It's a very, very important stat in PvE, and it's very hard to pass up. But in PvP, the Khajiit are going to be outshone by the Bosmer, the Wood Elves. That poison and disease resistance is extremely important in PvP, and it will cause the Wood Elf to edge out the Khajiit when it comes to PvP. That survivability that you gain is worth way more than some extra weapon critical. That critical is worth it in PvE, but in PvP, you can't deny the survivability that the Bosmer brings through their racial passives. Now, moving on to tank. If you want to play a Nightblade tank, you have a lot of different options. I have Argonian on my list of tanks mainly because of the potion passive and the way that works with Catalyst, with buffing your ultimate and having that percentage go up as you drink potions. I definitely think Argonian can be a viable tank for Nightblades. You also have your Imperials with that tough passive buffing your max health. And then you also have the Nords who get all of the different health buffs. The flat damage reduction, you can't deny the Nord's power as a tank, and those will be your 3 tanks for the Nightblade. Moving into the best race for healer, again, Argonian definitely can keep up. They get little buffs to Magicka. You also get, again, the potion passive. It's a very interesting passive that can work in many different ways, and I think for a healer, it can work. But I think the Argonian is going to get edged out by the Breton. The Breton gets the Magicka reduction on spells, you get the max Magicka, and you get the spell resistance, and as a healer, it's very important for you to stay alive. So I do think Breton is going to edge out the Argonian for healing. Now moving on to the Dragon Knight, we're going to start with, again, Magicka DPS. This should be no surprise to anybody. If you're going to be a Magicka DPS Dragon Knight, you want to play a Dunmer. Having that fire damage increase is too good to pass up. Way too good to pass up. Especially if you want to be a Vampire Magicka DPS Dragon Knight. You're going to get the fire resistance from being a Dark Elf, and in my mind, nothing really even comes close to touching it. Now, if you want to be a Stamina DPS, again, you have your Khajiit for PvE for the reasons described in the Nightblade part. Again, if you skip the Nightblade part, it is mainly because of the different stamina stuff that you get through their passives, but mainly because of the weapon critical. Also, for PvP, you have the Wood Elf. Also has very good stamina passives, but the reason that the Khajiit edges it out in PvE is because of the weapon critical, but the reason that the Bosmer edges out the Khajiit in PvP is because of the poison and disease resistance. So if you're going to be a Stamina DPS Dragon Knight, this will be your go-to. For tank, again, same reasons as described above. With Argonian not being in this list, you're going to have your Nord because of your damage reduction passives and all the health buffs that you get, and you're going to have Imperial because of the leech that you get, the health buff that you get, and the stamina. These 2 will be your best tanks. Now for your Dragon Knight healer, for PvE, Breton will be your best bet, simply again because of the Magicka bonuses that Bretons get and the passive spell resistance that they get, making them a little bit more tankier and more able to survive and keeping yourself alive as a healer. Again, it's very important. For PvP, you could play Breton, or something could also be said for Argonian, being that they just get a straight healing buff. The amount of healing they receive is increased, and they get a little bit of Magicka bonuses, and the potion passive, again, a very interesting one, can be comboed with different ways. But they also get the disease and poison resistance, a very good trait to have for PvP. So there is a case to be made for Argonians in PvP. Again, I think if you want to play both sides of the coin, PvE and PvP, I think Breton will be better. But if you want to only PvP and you just like the aesthetics of the Argonian better, you're not going to be gimping yourself by playing one. Moving on to the Templar. For your Magicka DPS race, you're going to again want to be playing a high elf for PvE. I'm sure you guys are going to notice if you've been watching through each of the races there, it's more important what your role is than what your class is. High elf is going to be your best for PvE again because of the fact that you get the elemental buffs, you also get the Magicka buffs, you get the Magicka recovery. It's just going to be your best for PvE. In PvP, if you want to go full damage, High Elf is going to be the way to go. But if you want to give yourself some extra survivability through spell resistance, you're going to want to pick Breton. Again, I personally value the survivability in PvP more than the full-on damage. Again, you're not even losing that much damage going from a High Elf to a Breton. So I think that the extra survivability you pick up, especially if you want to play a Vampire, is worth it. Now, moving on to Stamina DPS for, again, PvE, you're going to want to play your Khajiit, once again, for the weapon critical, and for your stamina recovery and stamina, like all the stamina buffs you get from being a Khajiit. Then, for PvP, again, Bosmer, for the stamina buffs that you get, as well as the poison and disease resistance, very important in PvP, and that extra survivability will eke out the weapon critical that you get from the Khajiit. For tank, again, you have your Imperial. For the leech that you get from Red Diamond, and the max health buff that you get through Tough. And then for Nord, all the health buffs that you get, and the flat damage reduction that you get from just simply being a Nord. Now, the reasons for playing the races in the Templar Healer are the exact same as the ones for the Dragon Knight, so I'm going to just kind of breeze over them really quick. For PvE, it's still the Breton, Magicka increases, spell resistance, just good all around, keeping yourself alive with the spell resistance and the max Magicka recovery, not Magicka recovery, just flat spell reduction, spell cost reduction. It's just going to be your best for your healer. In PvP, Bretons are good, but a case can be made for the Argonians, again, because they get the flat healing increase, you get your poison and disease resistance, and you get the restoration through the potion passive. I still think Bretons are going to beat them out in terms of just raw power in PvE, but again, a case can be made for the survivability of the Argonian in PvP. I think, again, still, if you're going to do both, Breton will be your best bet, but if you're only going to PvP and you like the aesthetics of the Argonian better than the Breton, the Argonian can still work and you will not be gimping yourself too much. Moving into our last class, we have the Sorcerer. Magicka DPS for PvE, again, the High Elf. They are just, especially for the Sorcerer, in this case, the Elemental Mastery that you get, all that damage buff that you get from that is going to be huge for the Sorcerer, huge. Not to mention the rest of the Magicka buffs that you get, nothing will beat a High Elf for Magicka DPS on a Sorcerer. For PvP, I would say this is when High Elf is really going to eke out Breton. I think you could play Breton for PvP, but I think for the Sorcerer, if you're going to use Magicka, High Elf really is your best bet because of the buff to the element damage that High Elves get. I don't think that little bit of extra survivability that Bretons get for Sorcerers is going to be worth it. Personally, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but just at a first glance, I think for any sort of Magicka gameplay for your Sorcerer, High Elf is going to be the way to go. For Stamina Sorcerer, your Khajiit still. The weapon critical is really big. The stamina recovery is very nice. Going to want to be your go-to for stamina DPS. Then, for PvP, you have your Bosmer. Again, they get good stamina buffs, but mainly it's because you have that poison and disease reduction that you would want to choose them in a PvP environment because it is much more important than that weapon critical. For tanks, you still have Imperial because of Tough, the max health increase, Red Diamond, the leech that you get essentially, the chance to restore some health, and some extra stamina couldn't hurt. Nord again for the flat damage reduction and the health increase. So if you guys watched all the different races, as I'm sure you can tell, all the different classes, as I'm sure you could tell, it's relatively the same for what races are best for which. Redguard and Orc don't really appear that much. The other races just really outshine them in all the areas. But I'm sure some of you are wondering, Dottz Gaming, I don't know what I want to do. I am new to this game. I don't know how anything plays. I don't know what I want to do. Well, for those of you who have no idea what anything does or what you want to play, or for any of you who you do know what things do, but you want to be able to play a little bit of everything on one character, your jack of all trades races, as I'm going to call them. And thankfully, two are on one faction, but one can go on any of them. You have the Argonian. The Argonian gets some buffs to, let me bring up my Argonian racials. You get some buffs to your magicka, you get some buffs to your health, you get poison and disease reduction, which is good for PvP, you increase your healing done and received, and whenever you drink a potion, all 3 of your stats get restored. It's obviously going to favor a magicka or a tanky type of build, but again, because Resourceful does restore some stamina, a case can be made for Argonian as just a jack of all trades. Like, I'm not sure what I want to play, I can just play an Argonian. Getting that max magicka added to Resourceful was very helpful and pushed Argonians into a viable race. So if you're not sure what you want to do, Argonian is an option. But the next option that you have is your Dark Elf. Okay? Your Dark Elves get an increase to max magicka and max stamina. Fantastic if you want to play a DPS. If you're going to play a DPS, and you know you're going to play a DPS, but you want to play both stamina and magicka, or you're not sure, play a Dunmer. You get an increase to both of those stats. Especially, you get even more of an increase to max magicka through Resist Flame. And you get that flame resistance. So, personally, Dunmer is going to lean more towards the magicka side of things. As, you know, you can really, you're going to want to play magicka on more on a Dunmer, but you can play stamina if you really want to. Especially because you do get some elemental increases, but again, it's going to be more towards your magicka side of things. In my mind, Dunmer they're mostly a magic race, but you can play them stamina or tank or whatever, because you do get the flame resistance too. But if you want to play the either a tank or stamina, or honestly anything, in my mind, the number one jack of all trades race that you could possibly play is the Imperial. Their stats, just a flat increase to health, a flat increase to stamina, and a chance on your melee attacks to steal some health. The perfect jack of all trades race. Every race, or every class, no matter what your role, needs stamina in order to CC break, and needs stamina in order to sprint, in order to dodge roll, in order to sneak. Extra health is never bad. It can prevent you from getting instantly blown up in PvP, or save your ass in PvE if you need some, if you're like almost dead, that little bit of extra health will have saved you. And especially if you're somebody who uses melee, you have some chance to restore some health on a melee hit. So, overall, for your jack of all trades, your best numero uno jack of all trades race, my vote would go for the Imperial. Again, if you want to be a little bit more specific and lean more towards magic, again, Dark Elf. And then I think probably the worst on this tier would be the Argonian. Anyway, guys, that is it for me today. I hope this video was able to help you guys out and clear up some of the stuff with the races in the Elder Scrolls Online. It seems overall it's relatively the same races for each role. It is quite the feels bad, man, that Orc and Redguard don't really fit in anywhere. Hopefully they do see some buffs so that they can eke out some of their counterparts, or at least be even and leave it up to personal choice. I do recommend trying to pick your race smart. Don't be scared if you picked Redguard or Orc, or if you're playing a Magicka Wood Elf. In the end, this is if you want to min-max your build. If you want to make sure you're doing the most possible damage that you could possibly be doing. And again, if you have absolutely no idea what you want to play, I do recommend Dunmer, Argonian, or Imperial. But if you're like me, I wanted to be more specialized, so I made a Breton Nightblade, because I knew I was going to be Magicka and I wanted to PvP. So I tried to give myself the best possible race to accomplish what I want. Again, it's gonna suck if Magicka Nightblades, because I don't know if they're great or crap right now. I'm still leveling mine, but it's gonna suck if they ever get nerfed, I'm going to kind of be pigeonholed into that. But it's, it's a risk I'm willing to take. If you have any questions about your race and class combination, or if you feel like you're stuck and want any advice, please leave a comment below. If there's any other beginner guides you want to see from me or things that you need clarifications on, leave them below, and I might make your idea a reality and, help you and other people out at the same time. If this video helped you, please drop a like. As always, please subscribe. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'm Dottz Gaming. Have a great day. See you next time.